So, this is the Amphion 410 bookshelf loudspeaker. This is also a product that, quite frankly, wouldn't be here if it wasn't for you all. And I say that because if it wasn't for you guys reaching out to Amphion to say, hey, send Zero Fidelity something to review, then this wouldn't be happening right now. And it just goes to show you that companies pay attention to what it is that you have to say, and your feedback does matter. So, this review goes out to you all, and this is going to be my take, well, on the Amphion Helium 410 bookshelf loudspeaker. Let's roll the intro. So one of the first things that most people are going to notice about the 410s is they are really, really small. To give you all context as to how small they are, what I'm going to do is I'm going to hold this CD up to them, and as you can tell, they're pretty tiny speakers. Now, if you're interested in things like dimensions and weight, what I'm going to do is I'm going to have a link to the product page down in the description box. That way you can check out all of that stuff for yourself. For now, I'm just going to give you a general summary as to what you get with these loudspeakers, starting with the fact that they retail for $750 US, and they're both designed and made in Finland. Now, focusing just a bit more on the design, this is going to be a two-way mini monitor. On top, we have a waveguide or a horn, and inside that is going to be a 1-inch titanium dome tweeter. On the bottom, we have a grill, and beneath that grill is going to be a 4.5-inch paper cone woofer. On the back, we have a set of 5-way binding posts, and then we have a port. Now, there's a few things worth going over here, starting with the fact that in my research, I found reviews of the speaker dating all the way back to 2011. And that forced me to ask Amphion, hey, that's a pretty long product life cycle. Has there been any meaningful changes to the design since then? And the answer, according to them, is yes. Number one, they're on their 5th generation of waveguide. But then number two, back in 2017, this speaker saw a number of different upgrades. There was a new tweeter put in. They decided to keep the woofer. The cabinets were upgraded. The crossover components were upgraded. And they moved the port around so you could get better bass extension while at the same time reducing distortion throughout the mid-range. And it's also worth noting that this is something of a lifestyle product, meaning if you want to introduce color into your life, you could get this speaker with different colored grills like blue or green or red or whatever, if that's something you're interested in. Now, lastly, I want to briefly touch on Amphion's philosophy because it's good to know where a company is coming from. And for Amphion, they believe that most of what you hear in the real world is a result of direct and reflective sound. So their priority is on developing a product that delivers an even-keeled presentation regardless of where you are in the listening space. And there's going to be a lot of emphasis on phase coherency and time alignment, but there's many elements that go into it, but that is, in a nutshell, what they're after, and that leads me to how these speakers sound. So let's get right to it. Okay guys, so I just decided really at the last minute here to challenge myself and to see if I can do the rest of this review in just one take with no edits whatsoever. It's going to be very similar to how I approached the PS Audio Sprout review, so let's see, fingers crossed, if I can put all of this information together in a way that makes sense to you guys. And I think the best way to start things off is to go over some of the highlights of the 410s, things that I know are going to pop out at pretty much anybody who takes these into their own home. And I think the first thing all of you are going to notice is their ability to lay down a huge soundstage. Now, a lot of us know that small monitors image very well, but these are just uncommonly good. In fact, they remind me of the Totem Arrow in many respects. The sound is very large, it's enveloping, yet still rock solid in between the speakers. Everything's focused. It's just really the best of both worlds. It's pretty cool. I'm not even a big imaging guy, and even I think it makes for a pretty awesome and engaging listening experience. And this is also going to be a great launching point for people who are more into headphones and are used to that kind of a presentation. This is going to be familiar territory for you. Moving on, there's going to be their uncommon sense of clarity and excellent resolution. And let me explain this. When you sit back and you listen to other products in and around this price point, you're going to notice that, yeah, many of them have good detail. And when you listen to them, your brain's going to associate that detail with the appropriate information, and it's all good. But when you go to something like this, you notice that these speakers just reach into the recording and they extrapolate information in a way to where it feels like all of it is fully expressed. You hear the beginning of the note, the middle of the note, the end of the note, and it just adds to a greater sense of realism. And this is the kind of resolution that you normally get in much more expensive loudspeakers. So we're starting to enter bona fide high-end territory here. And moving on, despite their small size, these have excellent power handling characteristics. And while they do sound best in small to medium-sized rooms, I would say that they can fill a big room up surprisingly well, making them a pretty versatile option. Now, what I want to do is switch gears and focus on their general character, because everything has a specific type of sound. And when it comes to the Amphion 410, I would say that it resides on the forward side of neutral. Now, the way it projects sound is going to be forward, meaning that when you're sitting back and you're listening to music, it's going to sound as though the presentation's taking place closer to your listening position than, say, other speakers that may be either more limited to the physical plane of the loudspeakers, or if they're more laid back, it'll sound like the presentation may be taking place behind them. These speakers project sound in a way to where it feels like it's just a little bit forward and a little bit more lively. Now, this character also bleeds into how they sound on a tonal level. The top end is going to come across as just a little bit accentuated, as well as the upper mid-range. And here's the interesting thing. I've seen the anechoic plot of this loudspeaker, and if you were to look at those measurements, this actually looks like a relatively flat loudspeaker with the top end actually being rolled off. And I think this is the perfect example of how frequency plot measurements in an anechoic chamber don't necessarily correlate to how you experience something in the real world. Because at the end of the day, we're looking at a speaker with a waveguide or horn, with a metal tweeter, and a small speaker in a real world space with real world reflections. And when you add all of those elements together, you're going to get a presentation that more times than not is going to come across like it's on the forward side of neutral. And what helps this even further is just how undistorted this speaker sounds, particularly along the top end. In fact, let's focus on the top end, because I think Amphion did an expert job in handling this. Because you look at that metal dome tweeter, you look at the waveguide, and you think, oh my god, this is going to be a mess. But it's not. While it is revealing, and while it's not going to exactly be forgiving of bright recordings, especially on bright gear, it's not going to be outright rip your ears off aggressive. Yes, there's going to be some bite to the sound. There's going to be a little bit of brightness to the sound, but it should never be overly aggressive. And I think that's because the tweeter dips well before 20 kilohertz. It's a smart move because, number one, you start to mitigate the tonal properties of the titanium itself. And on top of that, that prevents things from just going overboard. So it's very smart voicing on their part. And otherwise, the top end, just full of clarity, air, extension, all of that stuff. It's very, very good. Then we move on to the mid-range. The mid-range, much like the top end, focuses more on clarity than overt coloration. If anything, I would say that it's on the thin side of neutral just because you're dealing with a small speaker. So when you compare this small speaker to bigger speakers that'll sound fuller, you're going to notice that vocals and other elements are going to sound just a little bit thin. And this is when you're going to be able to pick up on the fact that you're listening to a tiny product. But it almost doesn't matter because, again, when you listen to the speaker, the way it's digging into the recording and revealing information, it's still engaging, at least in my experience. And now let's move on to the bass. The bass is strong for a speaker at this size. Now, it does roll off quite sharply below 100 hertz, but up until that point, I would say it's pretty darn strong. And this is commendable just because whenever a manufacturer has to build a speaker like this, they have a tough choice to make. You either focus on extreme clarity and you don't give the speaker much bass, which is a problem because if you don't have much bass, it's not going to sell. Or you give it bass and then you run the risk of introducing distortion into the mid-range. I think Amphion found a pretty happy balance here. Now, I will say this. At low to medium volumes, the bass is just like the rest of the presentation, clean and clear. One could argue due to the material, there's a little bit of warmth there. But I'll say this. It does get a little bit confused when you start to crank the volume a little bit and listen to complex music. Whether it's complicated metal music or whether it's classical, that's where you notice it's going to have trouble keeping up with the material. But here's the funny thing. Because the woofer is so small, unless I mentioned it, well, I did mention it, but if I didn't mention it, then there's a good chance that you wouldn't have even noticed what I'm talking about. Now, if this happened with a larger driver, then yeah, you probably notice that it's struggling just a little bit and is starting to sound a little bit slow and confused. But in a speaker this small, I don't think it's really something that's damning about its performance. Otherwise, driver integration, very good. I do believe, like most waveguides, there needs to be a little bit of distance between yourself and the speakers in order for everything to flow together very well. I'd recommend about 3 feet or further. Some of you are going to ask me, okay, Sean, but what about in a desktop environment? I think they're good, but the key thing towards getting good sound out of these in a desktop environment is going to be the driver placement relative to where your ears are. If your ears are above these speakers, then I feel like you're going to be able to easily identify the waveguide. But if they're right in between the drivers, that's the sweet spot, and I think even in the near field, they'll be okay. Otherwise, guys, these are very good speakers. Power handling is going to be exceptional for what they are. The efficiency, in the real world at least, isn't as bad as I thought. I think a good 50 watt per channel amplifier will get you most of the way there. When it comes to versatility in terms of playing back different music types, again, I think they're very good, but it's going to depend on your expectations, right? Because these are small speakers, so you need to leverage those expectations accordingly. They're not visceral. Right? If you're going to be listening to rock, they're not going to punch you in the chest at all. I mean, nothing at this size and price point will. But if you look at them for what they are, you can enjoy a wide variety of music. In fact, since these are Finnish loudspeakers, I was jamming out to a Finnish metal band called Nightwish, and you know what? It's fine. No, it's not the fullest sounding experience, and if that's what I wanted, I'd probably go with a bigger speaker. But otherwise, I would say it's okay. Still, nothing is perfect, and there's a few things worth mentioning, which is number one, they're small speakers. If you want that big full sound, you're going to have to get bigger speakers, plain and simple. Number two, they are on the forward side of neutral. At least in the real world, that's how they project sound. If you want something that's rolled off and warm, you're going to go with something else. But ultimately, I would say the biggest problem with these speakers isn't even the speaker themselves. It's going to be how Amphion markets them. If you go to their webpage, they market them as being a solution for your TV or some kind of, audio video system or something that's an accessory to your lifestyle, but not a serious high-end product. And I think they're doing it a disservice. I think the ad copy is writing this for somebody who doesn't really care too much about sound. They just want something that's cool, that sounds clear for their X system. I think that this is a bona fide high-end product, and I think they're alienating an audience by marketing the product in that way. But that's just my take on it. Otherwise, guys, the Amphion 410s, they're really good loudspeakers, all about clarity. They're aiming for linearity, and I think given the general price and size of the products, they did a very good job. Easy recommendation for somebody looking for a tiny solution. Subjectively speaking, normally I don't go for products like this that are voiced like this, but I admit I'm really enjoying them. And the last thing that I think I need to cover here is Bucart. People are going to ask me, do they sound like Bucarts? No, they do not sound like Bucarts. I actually said this many times in the comment section, but I'm going to say it now on camera. No, they're not like Bucarts. Bucarts are going for a smoother top end, more of a rolled off top end is the best way to put it. A warmer, punchier presentation. These are going kind of for the opposite. They're going more for that clarity and that linearity. That's what these are geared towards. So it's two different types of sounds, even though they look the same. So anyways, guys, that is it for now. As always, thanks for watching, and hopefully this review made sense. All right, guys, peace.